We're going to be building a small full-stack application in this tutorial with the purpose of demonstrating how to make sure the data the user is passing in from the front end is correct. In other words, we're going to validate form data sent from a front-end web app on the back-end API service. We'll be building a sort of microblog application. I'm not sure if that's the correct term for it, but it will allow users to create a post and then comments can be added to the post. In addition to the validation, take a look at the features of the app. We're going to be implementing a login process with GitHub, a back-end API to handle requests from our web app supported by a database, and various forms for users to send data to the API to create new posts and comments. This should give you lots of opportunities to learn how to put together your own full-stack apps and check out the tech that we'll be using. We'll be building our front-end app in React with Tailwind for styling, our back-end API in Express with a MongoDB database held in a Docker container for storage, OAuth login with GitHub for authentication, TypeScript for all our code, the NX monorepo tooling system to generate, organize and serve the individual parts of our application, and of course the Joy library to do schema validation on the user data. As you can see, there are lots of different things going on in this simple application, and I will go quite quickly through some of the sections, so if you're not quite sure about something, just leave me a comment below and I'll do my best to answer your questions. So that's enough of me talking about the project. Let's get cracking with making our microblog app and validating user input with Joy. So we'll start off here in the terminal. We need to get the project file set up for both our front and back end apps. And we could do these individually and have different repositories and different projects for them. But I'm going to be using NX, the NX monorepo tooling system, to actually create those projects and have them under one repository. Now, if you haven't used NX before, don't worry, it's fairly straightforward and I'll go through all the bits and pieces that you need to know, but hopefully you'll see that it's really easy to actually get both React and Express in our example project set up quite easily. So let's make a start. To use the NX tool, we basically call the npx command, and the command we're going to run is create NX workspace. We'll get the latest version of that, and then we just give it a name, so you can give your project any name that you like, but for our example we're going to go with microblog. You can call it something else if you like. And when you run the tool, what will happen is you'll be asked a series of questions, but what we're just going to do, you can obviously choose different types of projects to start off with. We're just going to start with an empty workspace so that we can customize it with our React and Express apps individually, and just show you how to do that as well. You can use the cloud if you wish, but let's just say no to that. And that'll take a few moments just to go away and install those dependencies. So we'll come back in a few moments once it's installed the packages for our project. Okay, so once NX has done its thing, what you'll find is you'll have a project called microblog, or a folder rather, and you can navigate into there. And let's open that up in Visual Studio Code. So that we can see how that looks. So if we head on over to Visual Studio Code, you can see that NX has installed loads of different things for us. We've got a folder where our apps will live, but there's nothing in there at the moment. So our first job really is to actually get the frameworks for React and Express installed, and then actually create the apps that we need. So let's just do that first of all by installing a couple of npm packages. So we'll say npm install, and these are narwhal packages. They're the people who make NX, and it's narwhal Express for our Express app, and also narwhal React, unsurprisingly, for our React app, and just set those as dev dependencies because we don't really need them for our production code. So let's just save that now. And again, that will take just a few seconds just to fetch those schematics that will help us build those two apps. But just to explain what they are, they're just a couple of packages which gives NX the ability to build either Express or React apps just by running a few simple commands. So once those are installed, we've got the ability now for NX to install either a React or an Express app, and you can do this on the command line, but there is actually a really handy Visual Studio Code extension here, which will enable us to generate those projects automatically, or rather it does the command for us. So if we install that and go to the generate option here, you can see we've got a list of all the different types of things that we can install within our NX workspace. So for example, we could just create a single React component or a library perhaps, perhaps. But what we're going to do is create a React application. And you can see there are lots of different options in terms of how you actually configure this React app that we're going to create. But I'm just going to keep things simple, and we'll keep the name of the app just as app. And you could call it something else, but we're only really generating one project within our mono repo. So this will be the front end app. And of course, we can set the style sheet to anything that we like, but we're going to be using Tailwind for this, so there's probably not really that necessary, but we'll keep it as SCSS. And you can see here, this is the files that will be created when we run this command. So let's just go ahead and run that, and that will just create a new React project for us. And you can see it's going away and fetching all the packages that we need for that as well. So whilst that's running, let's create the Express app as well. So back over here in the NX plugin for Visual Studio Code, we're going to look through here and find the workspace, or the generator rather, for the Express app, which is right up here at the top. So let's create a new Express application, and we'll just call this application API, because that's all it's going to be doing. It's just going to be providing some REST endpoints that the front end app is going to be using. So we'll just, we don't need to do anything else with that. There are some other options that you can configure if you want to do something different. But again, that will go away and create the application for us. And in just a second, we should find in our apps folder that we've got two new things there. We've got the front end app, which if you have a look in the source folder of there, should look very familiar to you if you've done any React work before. And the API will be set up in a very basic way, and there will be the Express app ready to go in there. So probably the next thing you want to do when you've got these applications installed is just to actually get them running. So here on the terminal, we can use the NX command to actually get this up and running. So we using the NX tool, we can say NX run, and then the name of the application. So in this case, we'll go API, and then just say serve. And if we run that, it should actually build the Express application and serve it for us based on how it's set up in this main.ts file. You can see we've got this message saying that it's listening on this particular port. So we do the same with the front end app as well. So we'll say NX run, and then we'll say app and then serve. And this will give us the actual React application running on a particular port as well. So if you don't have the NX tool installed at this point, you may not have done it if you've never used NX before. You can just install it globally by saying npm install global NX, and that will just give you the ability to run those commands that we just did a second ago. So let's just check out in the browser that we've got these applications set up and running. So let's head on over here to my browser, and we'll go, first of all, check the API is running. So 4 threes, and I think actually the endpoints are API. So there you go, you can see we've got a message coming back from Express saying welcome to API, which is exactly what we've got here in this get endpoint. And let's check the Express app, the React app open as well. So let's localhost 4200 as a port for that. And this is the React boilerplate that has been provided by the Narwhal team, and this will be a component that's inside of our app. Okay, so just before we start moving on to other parts of the application, one thing I just want to do and get set up inside of the front end is first of all the routing for our app, and then also we're going to configure Tailwind for our styling as well. So let's just first of all go over to app.tsx. And what we're going to do is just remove that example component that they've provided here from the Narwhal setup. And then we're going to create our own routing for the application, which we'll use throughout the tutorial. So the first thing we want for that is to basically install the React router. So let's install React router DOM. So we're working in the browser there. And that will give us a few tools and components that we can use to actually create the routing for the app. So let's just wait for that to install. Okay, and what we're going to do for our homepage of our app is just to replace what we had there before with browser router. And that will be the wrapping the routing for our application. And inside of there, what we're going to do, let's just have a header to start off with. And we'll first of all put a title for the app as well there. And then we'll have a navigation, which we'll sort out the styling for in just a second as well. But essentially that's going to be an unordered list with some list items in there. And we're going to have a few different links So from the browser router again, we should be able to import the link component as well. So from that link component, we're going to put a few bits of information in there. So the first thing is we'll just create a standard placeholder for home as well. So we'll say we're going to link to home, and then we're going to have a couple more links in our app. And the first one's going to be for, we'll say new post, and that will take create a new post is the title for the link. Just create post is fine. And then we want to say, we'll want to have a login ability as well. So we'll put a login link here too. So those are the links, but we want to obviously put the roots in for them as well. So after the header, what we're going to do, we're going to import the roots. It's not finding that in Visual Studio Code. So we want to import roots from React Router DOM. And from here, let's just open up the component for it. And inside of here, I import root as well directly from React Router DOM, just in case Visual Studio Code doesn't find it. So we've got the roots here. And we're going to create a route for each of those links that we've just created. So the first one, the path for the home page, we're going to send it to an element of, we're going to send it to a component called home. We haven't created these yet. We'll do that in just a second. And we'll do the same thing as well for create post, or say new post was the actual link. And we'll say new post is the component, and then we've got login as well, and that will be our login component there. So let's just create those components here so that everything stops complaining in this TypeScript file. So we'll create a new folder called components. So let's create one called login. We'll create another for home, and finally one for new post as well. So let's do the home one first. So export function, and we'll just call it home. And we need to return and render something here, because otherwise the application will complain, or the TypeScript will complain here for us. So we'll just say home for the moment, and we could just copy and paste that for the other two here, and just change that to login. And finally for new post as well, new post. And then if we go back to app.tsx, we should find we can import all of those components from here. New post, and then also login as well. Just notice these should be self-closing here really, so let's just update these here. So I don't think there's anything actually inside the root components, so that should just get rid of those errors for us. Okay, so now we should have some routing set up and being displayed for those different components that we created. So if we head back on over to the browser, you can see we've got all of our links, and we're on our home page currently. We go to create post, we've got new post, and then finally login. We're navigating to the login page as well. So that's all working okay. Let's actually get Tailwind set up, and so we can start using the styles in our application as well. And if you are using NX, you might want to find this guide here. Depending on how you've got your React installation set up, there's going to be different ways of using Tailwind, but there's this really handy guide from NX which will just show you how to do that. So the first thing is we just need to install these dependencies. Back on over to Visual Studio Code, let's install those. And while it's doing that, we want to first of all go into the application and initialize Tailwind. So basically we navigate into our app folder and then run this command here. So let's go back, and it's still installing, so we'll just give that another 2 seconds. There we go. So apps and then app. So this is the React app that we've set up that we need to install Tailwind in. So we'll run the Tailwind init command, and there's a couple of things that you need to do after that as well, just for post CSS, sorry. We'll just copy this code here, and you just basically replace that in the post CSS config that's been created by Tailwind, which is just down here. So we can just remove that, put that in there, And then finally, we just need to put in the content as well. So we're not using any stories or storybook for this tutorial, but we can just copy this complete config here for Tailwind, and it will just add in the directories that we're going to be using Tailwind in our app. So it will just help Tailwind find out where those files are and how to actually generate the libraries for it. So I think there is just the ability, we need to just import Tailwind here with these classes at the bottom. So let's just go into, we've got one main styles.scss file. So we'll add that. And if we go back on over to the browser, what we should hopefully find now is that you might have noticed that the layout's changed and the font's changed as well. And that's because obviously we're using Tailwind styles now, so we can say it's successful in being set up. So let's, before we finish off this section, add a few styles to the heading elements, just so that it's appearing in a bit more of a readable fashion for our application. Okay, so in the header, let's go into class name, and we're going to set in there a few classes. We're going to set a margin bottom of 4, padding of 2 all the way around, and then we'll use background blue of 100, flex, item center, and justify between. So that's basically going to just give us a nice centered header across the page. And then for the heading level 1 tag, we're going to make that font a bit bigger. So from class name, we're going to use padding 2 and then text for Excel. So again, just putting a bit of padding around everything and just making the font nice and big for that. And what we'll then do for the navigation, we want that to be in a kind of horizontal list. So first things, let's just say the class name, we're going to set this to a flex container. So it's flexed and then justify end. So I'll just push everything over to the right hand side for this nav element here. And then for the actual unordered list, we're going to say flex and then justify between, and we'll put some gaps in between each of those items. So we'll use a gap of 8. So if we have a look at that now, we should find that we've got our header and we've got our links across the top here as well. We should probably change them to a different color. So let's just put the links themselves here in a different color. So for each of those, the class name is going to equal to, we'll say text blue, and then we'll just say nice dark blue color of 800. So they look a bit more like links that you can click on. So at this point, we've got our front end application set up. We've got Tailwind installed, and we've got the ability to navigate between the different pages, the different components that we've created. And we've also set up Express as well to start serving our backend, although we haven't done anything else. What we're going to do in the next section is actually look at how to set up the GitHub login. So we're going to create a GitHub OAuth token and then link that up to our Express API so the user can actually log in as well. So in order to set up our login with GitHub, we first of all need to go over to GitHub itself and create an OAuth token. So we're going to be using the OAuth flow of logging in. So basically, GitHub will do all of the work of verifying the user for us. We don't really need to worry about any passwords or anything. They just simply click a button and log into GitHub if they need to, the user that is. So in the developer settings of your profile, you'll find GitHub apps, but also OAuth apps as well. So if we just go into here and create a new OAuth app, and we're just going to call this microblog dev. You might want to have separate OAuth tokens for development and production maybe, so that's why I've just called it dev there. And the home page itself, it will just set as the local host 4200, which is the React app obviously. And then we need to set in the authorization callback as well. So we're going to be using the Express app to handle the authorization, and we'll just set that on an endpoint saying GitHub authorize, and we're going to create that in Express in just a moment. So let's click the register application, and you can see there are no users set up at the moment, but we're going to configure our app now to actually allow the user to log in. We're going to start off by working on the front end to actually trigger the OAuth flow. So when the user clicks login, they have the option to log in with GitHub. So let's go over to our code and get that sorted out. So in the logging component, So we're just going to put some information in here, and the first bit of information we're going to need is the client ID, and I'm going to grab this from the environment file, which if you've used Angular before or NX, you'll be familiar with these files, but essentially it gives us the ability to provide different values for environments, whether they're in dev or production or anything else. So we're going to have this client ID value in here, and we're just going to grab that from the GitHub OAuth application that we just set up. So let's just copy it from here and go back, paste it into here. And there's a couple of other things that we need to know as well, but they're going to be static no matter what the environment is. So we'll save that, go back to the login component and grab that client ID value. The other bits of information we're going to need to know are the scopes. So what do you actually need to know? You can put things in there like user email. We don't really need a lot for this application, but we might want to grab their email if we were going to create an actual user account for them in our application. But we won't be doing that in this tutorial, but just to show you that it can be set here. And we're going to get redirect URI. So where is the user going to get redirected to once they're actually logged in? And this is going to be the Express application. So again, we'll save this in our environment file, but this is going to be the API URL. So for development, this will be HTTP localhost, and then the Express app is running on 4 threes. And what we want to do here in the actual redirect URI is go to / GitHub authorize, which if you remember in the previous step is what we said would be the redirect URI that the OAuth application will send us to. So that's all good. So the last thing we need to do is just set up the actual URL that we're going to send the user to log in with GitHub. So it's just something provided by GitHub. It's fairly static. We're just going to build it up with some of the information we've got above. So it's HTTPS and then it's github.com /login /OAuth, and then we call this authorization endpoint, and then we just pass in some query parameters. So we'll say the client ID is equal to the client ID that we've got above, and also we need to pass in the scope as well. So I think this is actually required, so we'll keep the email scope that we've got set up above. So 1 second, so scope. And then the redirect URI itself is equal to that redirect URI that we've just got above as well. So that's going to be the URL that we're going to send users to when they try and log in. So let's actually create a bit more of a sensible login page here. So we're going to have an opening and closing div here. We'll set some classes. Now we've got Tailwind installed as well. So the class name for this, bit of padding, set it as a flex container. It's flex column. And margin auto, so we're just going to have a centered kind of column for the user to log in here. We'll say the width is full on small screens, but if we hit a larger breakpoint, we'll just have a third of the page for that column in the center. And then let's have a heading level 2, and let's give that some classes as well. We'll say the classes for this are margin top and bottom of 4. The text is 3XL, so reasonably large text. We'll make the font black, and we'll just transform everything to uppercase, and we'll just say login is the title of the page. And then after that, we're just going to provide the user with one single anchor tag that they can use to log in with. So the href of this is basically going to be this GitHub OAuth URL that we've just generated above. And then let's add some classes to this as well. Actually one thing we can do in here as well, which we can add in the GitHub icon. So let's just go and grab that from their website. So if you just Google, get a new tab here, GitHub icons, for example, and I think it's on the official, let's actually type it in properly. So GitHub icons. Actually, no, if we say GitHub logos, that'll find it for us. Okay, so here we've got all the logos that GitHub provide us for us, and we've got this this mark option, and we can download that. And if we open that up, you'll see there are different files inside of there. And we'll just grab the PNG for this, and you can see we've got the light one, which is basically a white version of the GitHub icon. And we'll just pop that into the assets file of our project. So this is any assets that you want to use on the front end. Okay, so with that icon inserted, what we're going to do is we're going to put that in the anchor tag link. So we'll say we've got an image there, which is source of assets, and then let's get the exact file name here. So GitHub Mark Light. And paste that into here. And don't need the closing image there. And then after that, we'll just put a span of text of login with GitHub. Okay, and let's just add some classes to the anchor tag itself. We're going to say that it's got a background of black, and so that the white image for GitHub stands out, and then the text is white. Bit of padding on there again. The font is bold. Width is full, so it will take the full width of that column. Gap is 2, and then we're going to set it as flex, item center, and also justify everything in the div center as well. Okay, so if you go back over to the application and take a look at how that looks, you can see here we've got the login page now with GitHub. It's looking a little bit blurry just because I'm zoomed in a bit there, but I'll keep it as it is for the moment. And so when we click that, what we should find is we're redirected out of our application to the GitHub website. And you can see here now that we're on the familiar page that you might have seen before when you're using other applications to log in with GitHub. And we're just basically asking, do we want to authorize our user to use the microblog dev OAuth application? So we're just going to hold fire just for a second, because if we click that button, it's just going to redirect us to localhost to our API application, but there's actually nothing there at the moment. So let's actually build that out first. So back to our code. And we just close down the front end application for the moment, and we're going to go into the API. And first things, we'll create a new folder here for roots, just keep everything separate, and we'll have an auth root file. Again, it's TypeScript, so that's really handy. And what we're going to do is we're going to first of all import some stuff from Express. So we'll import the router and also the interfaces for request and response, and also the next function that's available here too. So that's all from Express. And then we'll set up our router. So router is equal to the call to the function of router, and then we'll just export that. So we'll export router as, and we'll call it auth root, so give it a named root there. And we're in a position now where we can say router dot post or get or whatever it is that we need to call. So the requests from GitHub are going to come in on a GET request. So we're going to set up that first. And of course, we set up the endpoint to be GitHub authorized when we created the OAuth application. So there we go. And then the callback here, we're going to have the request object and also the response object. And we'll just type those with the interfaces that we got from Express. And so what we're going to be doing here basically is accepting the result that GitHub is providing back to us, and hopefully it's a good result. And so if it is, then we can say that the user is logged in, and then we can therefore then generate some tokens, some JWTs that we'll send back to the front end app, which the front end app can then use in subsequent calls to the API to get data out of it. So let's first of all get some information from the data that's coming back, or the request that's coming back from GitHub, and we're going to get the query params from it. So that's from the request object, and then from the query params that have come back, we want to get the code, which is provided by GitHub, because what we need to do with that code, it's just in the URL that GitHub sends back. We need to actually send another request back to GitHub to verify that the code is correct. So what we need to do really is send a network request. So let's install Axios to send that for us, and we can use that on the front end React app as well later on. So that'll be really handy. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the GitHub auth result. So the result for a subsequent auth call is going to be, we're going to await that using Axios. We'll say axios.post, And we just send a post request to this particular URL. So it's https github.com again, and then it's login, and then OAuth. And then from that OAuth, we do / and then the endpoint is access token. So we're actually requesting an access token from GitHub at this point, and we need the client ID. So we need to grab that from the same place that we did before. But there is actually a separate environment file set up here for our Express application. So we need to have the client ID in here for the development version. So we'll say client ID, and I don't have that on my clipboard anymore. So let's go back and get it from the OAuth setup. So up here, let's go back, pop that in. And in auth.ts, so the client ID is basically equal to environment.client ID. That's pulled in the wrong file here. Client ID. And then from client ID, we also need to provide a client secret as well. And that's something we haven't actually generated yet. So we'll go back one more time to the OAuth setup, and you can see here we've got the option to generate a new client secret. If we click there, we need to log in to make sure that we've allowed to do that, and then you can copy this client secret that's been created here, and then we go back into, let's put that in the environment file as well. This should obviously be kept secret in our application, so provided in some other means rather than an environment file, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll just keep it in here, that's fine. So we've got client secret is in here, and back to the auth file, so we can say environment.client secret. And then there's one final thing that we need to do to provide to that request, which is the code that GitHub sent back in the previous request, which we got out here from the request that the query parameters that have been passed back to us. So that's all we need to do to send the request to GitHub. And we do also need to send in Axios no payload, so we'll just say null. And we'll also just set the headers here. So we'll say headers. Make sure we accept application. Oops, make sure we spell it right. Application JSON, and that will then send that request for us. So we need to do something with that data. We just need to check that there is actually an access token on there. So we're assuming that that's going ahead okay, but if not, we'll say if there's no GitHub auth result, or the GitHub auth result.data, because with an Axios request, you always get a data property, and that gives you the result from the actual call. So data.access token, and we're just going to check if that's actually available there. So if it is, or rather if it's not there, what we'll do is we'll just send a bad request back to the app. So we'll say request status 400.json. And then we'll send a status back of error, and then we'll just give it a message saying could not identify user with GitHub. And we should handle that on the front end, but for our tutorial, we're not going to have any bad logins, so that shouldn't really be an issue. But once we've actually done that, we need to do something else. We need to get some information about the user. So we're going to send another request to GitHub, but we're going to get some information from the API this time. And so we'll use the Axios again. So it's going to be a GET request this time, and we're going to make a call to the GitHub API. And we're just going to request the currently logged in user details. This time when we're setting our headers, we do need to make sure that we're setting the authorization here. So authorization is going to be the format they use is token, and then the actual GitHub access token. So we'll just grab that from here, like so. And we'll also make sure that they're accepting application JSON here as well again. Okay, so what we should find in this user response detail in here, in fact, if we have a look at the documentation for that, you find that what you'll get back is something that looks a little bit like this. So getting the actual logged in user will give you some JSON data that's a bit like this. So we're going to be using the login details, the ID, and we'll also grab their avatar URL. So we've got an image to display for the user in the app. Okay. So back in the application, this user response should have that information in there now. So we need to do a couple of things. We need to actually create a payload for it, generate a JWT, and actually send that JWT payload back to the front end. So from the data property, we'll just destructure that from the user response. Don't forget Axios always puts everything in that data property. And then we're going to grab the ID, login, and avatar URL, which is exactly what we just saw on the GitHub page a moment ago, and we'll grab that from the data, and then we'll reconstruct that into a payload object, which we're going to sign with our JWT. So we'll say the ID, the login, and the avatar URL, and we'll have all that information available on the front end then, so that'll be nice and easy for us. And we're going to create a couple of functions here to help us with this, because there's quite a lot of code that's needed to get this set up. So we're going to first of all create the token, but just before we do that, we need to install the JWT package. So back on the command line here, we'll say npm install. And I'm going to use the one which is a JSON web token. I think it's from Auth0, could be wrong. But this will help us just generate the tokens for us. Okay, so once that's installed, I'm just going to create this helper function here, and I'm just going to call it generate token. And that will just take that payload or a payload object in here, could be anything really. And with that payload object, I'm just going to simply return it. Let's turn this into an arrow function using the JWT package. Let's just import it actually. So import star as JWT from JSON web token. And then back down here, we'll just use the sign function that's available to us from that. And the thing that we're going to sign is the payload. So we're just saying payload. And then we need to provide a secret to that as well to sign it. So we're going to set that up in our environment file again. So we don't want to use one of the existing secrets that we've got. So quick tip, if you want to generate a random string, you can use OpenSSL rand-base6432. And that will just give us a nice random string to put in as our app secret. Again, this would probably be kept somewhere other than the environment file if we're doing this in a production environment, but it's fine for our app here. So app secret is equal to that. And then when we're signing the actual JWT, we'll use environment.appSecret. Okay, so the other helper function I want to create is just to set a cookie on the response before we redirect the user to where they need to go to. So let's just create some cookie settings, which we can configure or change if we need to. So we can say the max age for our cookie is going to be, we'll say 30 days, so 24 hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, and 1,000 milliseconds. And we're going to say it's secure if the environment is equal to production, which it should be false for our dev environment. And with those cookie settings, we'll just create another helper function here. So set a cookie on response. And that's going to take a few parameters, few arguments. So we'll say the cookie name is going to be the string, name of the cookie that we want to set. The value, which is going to be the JWT in our example here. So cookie value is string again. And we also want to pass in the express response object as well. So we can update that. And then all we're going to do in here is say response.cookie. So that's a helper function in Express to set cookies for us. And we pass in the cookie name, cookie value, and also the cookie settings. So this will just help make this code a bit more reusable if we need to use it somewhere else. So let's go back to our main authorize endpoint. So we've got the payload that we want to create here. So we could say the token is equal to generate token from the payload. And then with that, what we're going to do is say set cookie on the response object. So we're going to create a cookie called access token. The cookie value is going to be the token. It's just a string, don't forget. And then we're going to pass in the response object, which is the response for this overall callback. And then once we've done that, we'll say return res.redirect, and we're going to send it back to the front-end application. So we'll just make a note of what that is in our environments file. So app is http localhost 4200, which should just take us back to the home page. So we'll save that and then go back into the auth file, and we're going to redirect the users to the app URL once they've logged in. So just a quick summary before we wrap up this section. What we've done is we've created our OAuth token. When the user clicks accept to accept that they want to log into the application from the GitHub page, we'll end up back at this endpoint, and we'll send, we'll first of all extract the code from the query parameters that GitHub's passed back to us, and then we'll make a secret call to GitHub to actually verify the code. And if that's okay, we move on to this section where we grab the user's details from the GitHub API, and then we generate our own token, our own access token, set it on the response as a cookie, and then redirect the user to the app. So if we go back to the front end, we should find if we're actually, so this was the front end app, and we're waiting to authorize the application with GitHub. So fingers crossed, if we click authorize now, what we should find is we're being redirected and it's not. So okay, so what we haven't done is actually created the endpoint, or let Express know that the endpoint exists. So that's just a simple case of coming into the main file here. We'll remove the existing endpoint and we'll say app.use, and then we want to use the auth roots and just make sure Express knows about that. So if we go back and just go back to the previous page that we were on in the browser. So back at GitHub trying to authorize the application, click authorize, and this time we're actually redirected to our endpoint in Express, and which then generates payload and then puts us back into the front-end application. And if we have a look in our developer tools here in the application, we should find we've got our access token here, which if we grab that and just double check it in JWT, if we just paste an encoded JWT into here and have a look, you can see that we've got all this information in here. So we've got the ID from GitHub of the user, the login name, and also the avatar URL as well to use in our app. So there you go, we've got a working login for our application now. Before we start working on the app and actually starting to retrieve data and update that, what we're actually going to do is go back to our Express application. We'll create the endpoints for actually interacting with the posts, but first of all we need to set up our database, and we'll do that in the next section. So before we actually create the endpoints in Express to actually handle the getting of posts and also creating new ones and adding comments, we need to actually have a database to save all this stuff into. So we're going to use MongoDB in its simplest form, and there's a reason for that, because I want to show you how you can get around a lot of the security things that aren't present just by using a default interface to a database, and all that will become clearer when we look at the schema validation later on. But let's just get set up with the database to get going. So I'm going to be using a Docker container. So here we go. We've got a command here which will just create a new Docker container with a particular port setting here. So it will be on port 2702. But just going to create a new environment variable first of all, just called database name, and we'll call it microblog tutorial is the name of the database. In fact, let's just call it microblog tutorial, just in case there's any problems with the special characters. And if we run that now, what will happen is Docker will go away and create a new container for us. I'll just check that's running okay. So you can see here this last one is this container ID, which is the microblog tutorial, and it's running on this particular port. We can check that's working okay just by using the Mongo CLI and saying MongoDB, and the password is just going to be the same as the database name. So hang on, it was microblog tutorial. Oops. and also the same as the password. Password is exactly the same, so microblog tutorial, and that's at localhost, and then the port is 27020. And if you run that, we should be able to connect, and now we're logged into that Mongo database using the Docker container. So the database is all set up. Let's actually just go and put that information into the environment for our app. So we'll just create a new environment file here, variable here called connection string, and then same sort of thing again. So MongoDB, and then it's microblog tutorial, and the password is the same. Make sure I spell it correctly, and then it's at localhost 27020. Okay, so we've got our connection string. We need to install MongoDB, so that's just in the case of npm install MongoDB, and that will go ahead and get the node package for us. And then what we want to do in our main.ts file is actually make the connection to the database. So we'll put that, actually let's create a new file in here, just next to our main.ts. I'm going to call that database.ts. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to export from this file a collection. So we'll just say db collection is a MongoDB collection type, and we're then going to create a client which is equal to a new Mongo client, and it wants the connection string inside this function as well. So we'll say environment.connection string, and that should be all we need to do to create the Mongo client, but we do need to connect to it. So we'll export another function from here saying const connect to database, and we'll say it's async. And what that will do, it was just call on the client that we've just created above, client.connect, and we'll also then set the database itself. So we'll say client.database, and we'll say microblog tutorial. It's the database name, and then db collection, so that's exported variable at the top there. And we'll say db collection is equal to db. So that's the active database that we've selected, database collection, and then we'll just call it posts, and just make sure TypeScript knows what it is as collection. So we can use this connect to database function to actually make a connection. So in main.ts we can call that function, and it doesn't really matter too much where we call it, but we'll call it as early as we can, probably before we set up Express. So connect to database, we'll import that, and it will return a promise. So we'll just say when that's done, we'll just log something out to the console. So we'll say console.log database connected, and if there is any errors, make sure we catch them. Oops, and we'll just say console.error. And if we go back to NX, the window, the terminal that we had there before, it should still be running and listening for changes, and you can see there now that the API is listening and also the database is connected. So that's all good. Doesn't seem to be any problems with that. So we should be able to proceed now with creating the routes for working with that collection and actually inserting and retrieving some posts. So we'll create a new routing file in the routes folder here. We'll call it post.ts, and we need to do similar things that we did in the previous routing file as well for auth. We just need to make sure we import some stuff. So we need to import the first of all request object and the response object, and also the router itself from Express. And then what we'll do is we'll just create the router object here. Let's just call the router function, and then we'll just export the router as post routes. And I'll tell you what we'll do. While we're here, actually, we'll go and actually put this into main.ts as well, because I'll forget to do it later and things won't work. So we'll say post routes, and we can actually mount it in the Express app on a particular endpoint as well. So we can say in here, for anything that comes in as /post, use those post routes, and that'll just help us keep things a bit tidier if you're going to be adding more routes into the app later on. Okay, so in this post routes file, what we're going to do is going to create 3 routes. First of all, we want the router to have get. So if we in our React app later on, when we come to say get post, we'll get all of this function will run and we'll get all the posts from the database. So we'll say request and response. I'm just going to leave it as it is for the moment. And we're going to do 2 others as well here. We're going to have a post. So it's a bit confusing with the name of everything, but this is a HTTP post. So when we're posting in some data to the app, this function will run. And then we also want to have a post endpoint as well for comments as well. And that's going to be slightly different because we want to say /post, the ID of the post, and then we'll just mention that it's a comment as well, and that function will run there. Okay, so probably could name those better, but there we go. So let's first of all do the get endpoint to get all of the data out of the database. And this one's pretty straightforward. We just say we want to make a result, which is going to be using MongoDB to find the information. We want to import that DB collection, which we set up in the database file. And we'll just run a simple find and just don't pass in any options there. And then just convert that to an array. And once we've got that data, make sure this function's async here. Once we've got that data, all we need to do is return res.json, and we can put a status on there of OK if you like, and also we'll pass back the result. Okay, so there'll be an object passed back here that has a property of result, which will be all of the items in the array, and we could probably test that out in the browser just quickly. If we go over here so if we just go to localhost 3333 and then post is the endpoint we want to look at, you can see we're getting a response back here. Obviously there's nothing in the database at the moment, so we're getting a result of nothing or an empty array. So that's fine, but that's working okay. So let's start working on the other 2 endpoints as well, but we want to make sure that these routes are protected. So for the get endpoint, it's fine, we want users to be able to see all of the posts in the database, but we don't want an unauthorized user that isn't logged in being able to post into the database. So we want to validate the access token that they're providing, if at all, to make sure that they actually have gone through the login process and they're verified and ready to log in. So what I'm going to do in the auth file, that's probably the best place for it in our code, is create a new function in here, new helper function, and I'm just going to call it validate access token. And this will be something that will take the request object that's been passed in from an express call, and also it's going to have the response as well, so we're going to pass the response back as well if there's any problems. And we also want the next function as well, because we're going to be, it's a bit of middleware that we're going to be using in between the calls, the endpoints that require validation. So the first thing we're going to do is to actually say the access token that we need is equal to request.headers. And there should be on there, assuming we get any headers back, should be the authorization header on there, which we'll need to provide in the front end app to make sure that this all works. And that's going to be, we're going to be using the traditional bearer token. So there'll be a prefix of bearer, and then the actual token is after that in the authorization header string. So that will be our access token. So if we don't have that, then we'll send a response to the user. We'll say return res.status first of all of 400, and it's a bad request, and then we'll say JSON status error, and then the message could be something like no access token provided. Okay, and then we also want to actually decode the access token to make sure that it's actually been not been tampered with. So we'll first of all wrap this in a try catch block, and we'll say we're going to create variable called decoded, which is the decoded access token, and decoded is going to be equal to jwt.verify, and then we pass in the access token to that, and we also pass in the app secret too. So from our environment file, we've got the app secret, and that should decode the token, but it'll throw an error if not. If there is a problem, we won't really do anything, but if there is a problem, then decoded won't be set. So if not decoded, we'll return for status, and we'll say 400, and then we'll say JSON, and the status is again error, but this time it's the message is could not verify access token. Okay. I guess these actually should be 401 statuses because that's unauthorized. So let's change those to 401s there. Okay, so if we've got to this point, then we have decoded the access token and there's been no other problem. So the user is authorized and is able to do stuff to the API. So we'll first of all, from the decoded token, grab all of the information about the user that's in that token. So we'll say decoded, and we'll create a new user object and actually pass that onto the request object. So this will make it available in the further endpoints that occur after this middleware. So in the user object, we'll pass back in the ID, the login, and the avatar URL, and we'll get a bit of a TypeScript problem here because it'll complain saying that this user property doesn't exist on request. So we can just create a new interface for that, and we'll export it in case we need it anywhere else as well. So we'll export an interface of logged in user, and that's equal to those different properties. So we've got string of ID, and the login, which is also a string, and the avatar URL, which again is just a string. So we've got that interface there, so we can say that the request object is the same as request, but it's also got an additional property on there of user, which is of type logged in user, which should hopefully make that TypeScript error message disappear for us. So just to finish up this middleware function, if that's all good, if we've got the user and we've set it on the request, we just call that next function, which takes us onto the next part of the chain within Express. So now when we go back to the post endpoints that we've got set up here, these two here, where we want to actually make sure that they're protected, we'll simply just put in there validate access token, and from there, those requests will need the token supplied before we can do anything else inside of those routes. Okay, so with that set up, let's actually finish off these two endpoints. So here we've got the ability to post a new post into the database. So what we'll do from the post request that's coming in, we'll grab the body, and we can also now extract the user from the request object. So we've got information about that available to us, and we do need to make sure that Express knows about that as well here. So we'll say user is of type logged in user. That's a good job we exported it there. So we've got both of those bits of information. So we just need to try and actually put this data into the database using MongoDB. So what we'll do is we'll say the result is equal to await the DB collection, which we've got imported, and we're going to say insert one. And what we're going to do inside of there, pass in an object, and we're going to pass in a body, and we're also going to pass in a specific ID which we can use ourselves. We could use the MongoDB IDs, but I'm going to create a new one for ourselves. So I'm going to import this random UUID function from crypto, from the crypto library, and that will just put a generic UUID in for this particular post that we're putting in. And the other thing I'm going to put in there as a separate property is the user object, and that will basically tell us which user actually created this post. So we just need to make sure that this is async for the await keyword to be okay. And that should then insert something in the database. So all we need to do from here is return res.json. We'll say the status is okay. And then from there, we're going to pass back the result object as well. So we can actually test this out in Postman. If you wondered why I'd got Postman open in between windows here, we can actually send a request to the API just to test out that's working and create a new post in the database. So the URL we need to send it to is http localhost 3333 and then post. And then in our body, we're going to be using a couple of properties. We could put anything in there at this point, and that's kind of the point of this tutorial really, but we'll look at how to refine this later on. But we're going to basically be having a title for a post. So we'll say a new post, and then it will have some content, and we'll say the post content. And then all of the other information like the user and the comments is populated later on. Of course, if we send this at the moment, we should hopefully get a 401, which it looks like we do, because we're not providing an access token. So we know that middleware is working. But if we go to our authorization, go to the bearer tokens section, I think this probably is a bad token, but let's just check. So yeah, this token can't be verified. So it's an old one I've got set up here in Postman. But if we go back to our front-end application from when we logged in before and just copy this access token that we've already generated, go back to Postman and paste that access token into there and click send, we can see now we've actually got an OK message back, a 200, to say that we've inserted that post into the database. And if we also then call the GET request again, we should find that we've got a post in the database and the user has also been populated as that additional property. So that endpoint is working okay. Let's actually create a comment endpoint as well, so we can add comments to the posts. So let's just close up this one here. Okay, so we've got the validation set up already for this, and so let's just make sure we've got the user type in here as well. So we've got logged in user, and let's just open this up. So same sort of thing again, we're going to get the body and the user from the request object. And we also want to get that parameter here, this ID, which lets us know what post we want to add the comment to. So that ID is going to be available in request.params. Make sure we've got the assignment operator there. Okay, so we've got that information. What we want to do is similar thing as in the previous endpoint. We're going to basically call a MongoDB function. So await DB collection dot update one this time. So we're going to be updating a post with a comment, and we're going to find the actual document by calling ID. And then the payload that we want to set in is a bit of a weird one. It's a MongoDB specific thing, but we want to push in to the comments property on this particular object. And we're just going to pass in the body, the user, and again, an ID, probably not needed for the tutorial, but we'll pass in a random ID for the comment that's being generated. So let's just tidy that up. Okay, so this will add a comment to the ID, the post with the ID that's been provided, and then we'll return res.json status okay, and then the result as well. So if we go back to Postman, let's just find the ID. Actually, it'll tell us the ID of the post that we've already created. Wait, let's just grab this, make sure we get all of it. And then we're going to create a new comment. So we'll do that by /post and then comment. And again, we could put anything in here at the moment because there is no validation, but the format we're going to be using for our comments is literally just one property, which is text. And we'll say the first comment. And the validation should be on there. And we've got a positive result back from the API. So if we have a look at this object that's coming back from the get endpoint now, if we just refresh this, we can see now that we've got the post and we've got one comment in there, that's got our user details, and it doesn't seem to have the text in there as well. Okay, so I might have missed that in the code. Let's just have a look. So we should have the body from the request. Maybe I didn't send it properly from here. It's definitely JSON. Oh, I'll tell you what it is. So what we need to do for Express to actually accept some JSON data is to use the JSON body parser. So back over here in main.ts, just before we're setting the roots, is to use express.json. Call that function there. So this just means that Express is able to deal with and parse JSON data. So if we go back and actually try that again, we should actually see there'll be 2 comments in there now, but we should see the second comment has the text. So yeah, it's been parsed from the body that's been passed in. Okay, so the API is pretty much up and running and ready to serve data to the front end. So let's move next onto the front end in our React app and actually create the services that will interact with the API and actually pull in the data. And we'll start building up some components, which we can then start actually creating a functioning app. Okay, so let's make a start on that by going over to our React code. In fact, let's close down all of the API files for the moment. We don't need to do much in there. And let's go back to our app and we'll get up the home page, or the home component rather. And we're going to start here by actually grabbing all of the posts from the API and starting to display them here. But before we do that, let's actually create another couple of files. We'll create a service for actually getting any posts from the database. So let's create a new folder called services. And we also want an auth service as well. So we'll say auth.service and also post.service. .ts. And so these aren't specifically React files, they're just helper files to actually send the requests for us. And we'll actually do the auth service first because we need this to actually get the access token for when we're going to be decorating the requests that require authentication. So let's get this done now. So we'll say export class auth service. And there'll just be a couple of static helper functions on here. And we'll say, first of all, static get cookies, because obviously the auth token is stored in a cookie. And that's just going to basically return an object, which will be a key, string, and string. So that's the object it's going to return. Okay, and so we're going to just do a bit of jiggery pokery here to get the cookies from the document cookie string and put it into an object which we can then reference. So if there is a document .cookie available to us, we'll say document.cookie.split and split it on the semicolon delimiter there, but if not, it's just going to basically be an empty array. So we'll save that there, and with that we can then return the cookies and we'll map them, and for each cookie that we've got we're going to split it again. So we'll say cookie.split dot equals. So that's the key value pair for each of the cookies, and then we'll just reduce that into the object that we want to pass back. So accumulator, key value, and for each of those key values, what we'll do is we'll return part of the object. So we'll return the accumulator, and then we'll also return the key. Trim any white space. So this is a computed property for the object, and just decode the URI component of the value, and we'll start off with an empty object. I've got some missing braces there, and close off the reduce function there. So that's just a nice little helper function which will just get all of the cookies for us. And what we can then do with that cookie helper is we'll create a new static function which is get access token, which of course is stored in the cookie. So first of all, get the cookies equals this dot get cookies. and then we'll return cookies, and cookie after is the access token. Okay, so with that, we know that we can actually get the access token, but let's just create another quick helper function saying, is the user logged in? And with a Boolean, which will just return this dot get access token. So if there is an access token available there, we'll assume that the user's logged in. We've got no way to verify the token on the front end, so we're just going to have to trust that that's been provided to us. And with that function, what we can do is inside of the app component, which has got our routing in there, we can have a bit of control as to when we show those links. So if the user is not logged in, so we'll say not auth service dot is user logged in. So if they're not logged in, then we can't show them the create post route. So we'll just show them as null. In fact, we'll do it the other way around. So if the user is logged in, we'll show them this list item here, where they can create the post. But of course, if they're not logged in, then we'll just show them nothing. And what we want to do for the login is not show them that. So if the auth user is not logged in, then we're going to show them the list item with a menu item, and otherwise we'll just show them null. So just a bit of conditional. So we should find now in the app that where are we? So here's the app. So we're logged in, so we can only see the create post route. We can't see the link to log in again, because we don't need to do that. Okay, so just some help functions in the auth service. So let's work out the post service. So we need to do a few things in here. Again, we'll export a class of post service, and what we need to do is grab the base URL that we're going to be sending our requests to. So this is the environment dot not in production dot API URL. Yeah, we have that there. So that's the backend service, and we'll create some more static functions here. So first one, as we've just been doing in the browser, we want to get the posts for the application, and that will return a promise, which we could just type as any, but it might be worth at this point just creating some interfaces to represent the data that's coming back, because that'll make our lives a lot easier when we're putting these components together. So let's just temporarily put that on hold. So back in the app folder, we'll create a folder called interfaces. Okay, and we need a few different interfaces here, but we'll mainly be using the post interface. So we'll create a file called iPost, export interface. Oops, it's TX file. What's that? So TS. So export interface iPost, and that's going to have a few things on it. So we need to know the ID of the post. We're going to need to know the title of the post to display that, the content that's inside it, and also we'll have the user, and we'll also have the comments as well, but we'll create separate interfaces for those. So let's first of all create an iUser interface. So iUser.ts, export interface iUser, and the iUser, it's only got those three properties on there really. So we know the ID of the user, they've got the login, which is essentially their login name, and also that avatar URL string as well. And then the other thing we need is for the comments as well. So iComment, so iComment.ts, export interface iComment. And don't forget, the comments are only going to have one property, which is text, and then they'll have a user property on there as well, which is just that iUser interface that we created a second ago. So back in the iPost interface, so we've got iUser, and then comment, we'll say comments, I think it is iComment, and then that's an array of those comments. Okay, so those are our interfaces. That'll just make life a lot easier in our TypeScript code as we go through the rest of the services here. So this promise is going to return iPost, an array of those post interfaces. And what we want to do is just simply send a HTTP request to the backend to get all of the data. So we've already seen that in the browser. It's just simply a case of sending a request with Axios. We'll send a GET request. So it's going to have a property in there called result. We won't worry about the status that's returned because hopefully it should be good. iPost. So that's the type of data that it's going to return. Whoops, put that inside the parentheses there. And then we just need to send a request to the base endpoint. So post service.base URL, and then post is where all of the posts are retrieved from. And then from the data that's returned, we just want to return data.result. And obviously forgotten the await keyword here as well. So let's just save that. So that should get all of the posts for us when we're actually on the home page and want to display them to the user, which we'll come on to in just a second. But let's finish off the couple of other post service functions that we need here. So we're going to create another static async function, which is create post. And when we create a post, we're going to be passing in a payload. So the payload will have content and title, which is a string. And this will return a promise. Well, we're not really worried about what the return type is with this. It's just the information that's coming back from MongoDB. So we'll just leave that as any. Okay, so the first thing we need to do with this create function is actually create headers for it, because don't forget, as we saw in Postman, if we don't send the authorization token, then obviously the request will fail. And as mentioned, that will be a bearer token. So we prefix the string, the authorization string, with bearer. And then from our auth service, we just get the access token from there. And that's our headers. And then we just need to do the same thing that we did with our GET request, but this time we're going to be doing a post request. So axios.post, and this is going to be using the base URL /post. So we just that's where we're sending our data to, which is stored in that payload variable. And then we just need to make sure we pass in the headers as well. Okay, we can return the data from this, but we're not really going to be worried about it as long as there aren't any problems. Then this should create a new post for us. And we can pretty much do the same thing for the create comment function. So I might just copy and paste this here. So we'll say create comment. Oops. But the payload will obviously be slightly different. It's just going to be the text property and string. Okay, but we still need to get the access token. We also need the ID of the post that we're posting to as well, posting the comment to. So we'll pop that in as a second parameter to the function. So we've got the payload, which is the comment details, and then we've got the post number or post ID that we're going to be updating. And we can use that then when we come down to posting to our endpoint. So we first of all go /post, and then we post to the next thing is the post ID, and then /comment. And then everything else should be pretty much the same. We're just passing in the payload to that endpoint, and the Express app will do the rest for us. Okay, so that is our post service created now. So we've got the ability to get the actual posts in the database. We can create a post and create a comment as well. So let's go into our home page, and we'll start working on getting the posts and actually starting to display them to the user. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just get a bit of state for this home component. So we're going to have some posts and set to posts, and we go use state, React hook there for us, and we're going to use our interface here. So you can already see how this has been really useful to create those interfaces, and it'll just be an empty array to start off with. So that's the type of data in our posts state, and we're also going to have another bit of state here saying posts updated, and that will be corresponding set posts updated. I'll explain a little bit more about what this is for now, but before I forget to actually put it in, let's put it in here while we're doing making our state. But this is basically going to be for triggering an update in the parent home component from the child components that we'll be creating. For instance, when a new comment's added or something, we want to make sure that everything's updated. So that's basically what that state's going to be for. Okay, so we're going to also use the use effect hook as well. And from here, we're not going to run it all the time at the moment. We're just so the array that we pass in as the second argument is blank. And we're just going to use the post service, and we're going to call the get posts function, and of course that's going to return a promise for us. So we'll say then the retrieved posts that we get back from that is equal to well, we're just going to set the state on that. So set posts is equal to the retrieved posts. And what I'll also do at the moment is just log that out to the console, because we haven't got anywhere in our user interface at the moment to actually display those posts. So we should just be able to check that that's in there just by looking in the console. So if we go back to the browser and have a look at our page at the moment, we're going to find that we're getting this error at the minute, and this is because we haven't actually set up cores in the Express application. Just to show you this, I just wanted to leave it in there really, just because it's something that happens pretty much every time that I'm making an application. You just kind of forget about these things. But essentially the request to the GET request has been blocked, so we need to go to our Express application to enable that. So let's do that, and we should be all good then. So in the terminal, npm install the cores package, and where's our main.ts file? So in the API, where we're connecting to the database and configuring Express, this is where we're going to enable cores, just so that you can send requests from different ports in our case, because our application for our API and for the front end are running on different ports, and that's why we're getting this cores error. So import star as cores from cores, and then it's just a case of saying app.use cores, and that's a function that we call on there, and hopefully that should have updated everything in the API. So if we go back to our web app and just refresh the page there, you can see that those errors are no longer coming through, and we're actually getting data coming back from the API as well. So you can see we've got that one post in the database that's coming back, and obviously there's the first dodgy comment where we didn't put any text, and then the second comment where there is some text. So you can see that there, and you can see it here in the console as well, because we're logging it out in our use effect. So next up, we're going to be creating the components for displaying posts for comments, and then we'll work on creating the UI for creating a post on this page here as well, and that will give us the ability to add our own data in via the front end as well. Okay, so let's kick this section off by going back over to our code and our components in the React app, and we're in the API here. Let's just close that down. We want to be in the React app here, and we've got 3 components already for the home, the login page, and the new post page. But what we're going to do on the home page is here, instead of just displaying an empty h2 tag, we're actually going to display a list of the posts themselves. So let's start off by creating the post component. We could of course do this all in the home.tsx file, but it makes sense to separate a post off into its own component. So let's export a function of post, and what we're going to do in here is accept a prop into the actual post component, and we'll just type this with our TypeScript. We'll say there's one prop which is post, and it's iPost, So we're just going to use that to actually render the component details in here. And there will actually be another prop as well, which will be the post changed. And we're going to use this, as mentioned before, to just notify the parent component, the home component, when a comment's been added or something, so that we can just reload all of the posts from the API. So we'll leave that there for the moment and just extract both post and post changed from the props that are passed in. Okay, so we're in a position now where we can return some markup, some JSX, and what we want to do in here is return the markup that will show one of the posts on the homepage feed. So I'm going to use an article tag for this, and we'll put a few bits of some CSS with our Tailwind classes on here. So margin top and bottom of 4. Shadow large, so that's just a box shadow around the edge just to make it stand out a little bit there. And what we're going to have inside there is a div, and just to separate some of this top content up, gives a padding of 4, just bring it in from the sides. And the heading level 3 tag inside this section here is going to be for the title of the actual post. So let's give that a bit more size by giving it the class of TextXL, and we'll also make it bold as well, so we'll say font bold, and then this is going to be the title as mentioned. So we just, from the prop that's been extracted, we've got the post, and because we've typed it nicely, we can just access the property there. So we're going to have the title up there, and then what we're going to have after the h3 tag itself is another div, and this is just going to be the image of the user and also their login name as well. So let's put the class name in here. Again, some padding on the top and bottom, flex, items center, and we'll have a gap of 2 just to line them up nicely on the one line that we've got here. So we're going to have an image tag, and the source of that is going to be from the post .user.avatar URL. So that's obviously coming from the API, and it's the GitHub avatar URL, so we'll see the images appearing for that. Let's give that some classes as well. So we'll say the class name for this is width of 8, so just a small little rounded image, and we'll achieve the rounded effect with rounded full Tailwind class. And we guess we should put an alt attribute on here as well. So we'll say post user.login is the alt text if that image can't be found. Okay, so we'll save that. And the other thing we're going to do just after the image inside this flex container is just to have a bit of text to say by, and then we'll put a strong tag in here to say post.user.login, and that will give the username for the currently logged in user that the user that created that post at least. And then once we've finished off this container here with the information from the author, we're just going to have one final div, and we will don't need any classes on that especially. Let's just put a bit of padding on that so it matches up with everything else so we don't forget that. So we'll say padding just on the top and bottom of 4, and inside that is literally just going to be the post contents. That'll be the main body of the post. So we'll save that, and that's pretty much all we need for the post component just to get it to display. So if we go to the home component now, where we're just displaying this home information, we're going to update this now, and instead of just returning the h2 tag, what we're going to return is a div with a class name of padding 2, flex col, and margin auto, and if it's a small device we'll have full width across the screen, but if it's anything on a larger device such as the desktop that we're on at the moment, we'll set that to a width of 1/3, and that's exactly what we had in the logging component as well, so hopefully it should look fairly similar. And for the h2 here, so this is just going to be the title of the page, so we just margin top and bottom of 4 again, text 3XL, nice large text for the heading, font black and uppercase, and of course that matches what's on the login page as well. So with that we'll just say it's latest posts, Okay, and then what we'll do, because we've actually at this point should have retrieved the posts with our post service above, so we'll just say for the posts, we're going to map those, and for each post that we've got inside of that array that's been returned, we are going to create a post component. Just import that there, just self-close it here. And it's got a couple of props that we want to pass in as well. So the first is going to be the post, which is obviously the post that we've just got in the array here. And we're also going to pass in the post change prop, and that will basically be a function that we're going to pass in here, which will update the state above here. Let's just create that quickly so we can finish off this section. So posts changed is equal to a function, and when that's triggered, we just say set posts updated. And we'll just do a math.random, just give it a random number each time just so that the state changes. And then when that is done, we can trigger the use effect from this post updated. So that's the one we want there. So when post updated changes, we'll trigger another call to the API and get the fresh data once that's updated. So we're going to pass in that function as a prop to here. And of course, we just want to make sure we've got a unique key for each of the posts that we're components that we're creating here. So we've got post.id, and that should do nicely. So we should now at this point be taking the posts that are coming back from the API and rendering those as these post components. Let's just have a quick look in the browser, see what that looks like. Let's close the developer tools for a moment. So there you go. You can see if we just adjust the zoom a bit there, you can see we've got that latest post, and this is the post that we created. And of course, we're not rendering any comments at the moment, and the content doesn't seem to be coming out there. So let's just check what's going on with that. If we have a look at the data in the APIs, just refresh that. No, it doesn't actually seem to be any content on there at all. So that's a bit wrong. So what we'll do is we'll just wipe down the database. I must have made a mistake when adding that in. So on the terminal, if we use the microblog tutorial database, so db.posts.find, you can see that's the content we've got in the moment. And if we just use the remove Mongo command, we've now removed that and there's nothing in there. If I go to Postman quickly, and where we created, let's just create a new tab based off of this one, duplicate the tab. I don't want to create a new comment, I want to create a new post. And in the body, we've got title and content. We'll probably change this to first post. Put some content in there, and if we save that, if we go back to the API and just, to the browser and just refresh that, you can see we've got some content now. I must have missed that when we created the first document, but we've got the title and content. So now reloading the app, we should find we've got the first post by me, and this is the content of it down here. So we're actually rendering the posts out as components now. So we'll just add a comment in here via Postman as well, just so that we've got some data to work with. So let's grab the ID of this particular post, the one that we've just created. So we'll post comment, and this time we don't need all of this. We're just going to put in text and the first comment. Okay, so we should add that to our existing post. You can see there it has got a comment now, and we're now ready to render that comment at the bottom of this post as well. So let's move on and work on that. So we're going to want to create a new component for that as well. We'll create a comment.tsx file. So we'll export another function, and it's going to be a function called comment, unsurprisingly. And props wise, we're going to be passing in the comment. So we'll just say it's comment of iComment, and then we'll just extract that from here. So we'll say comment is equal to props, and then we're just ready to render some content from that. Comments are fairly straightforward. There's not much interaction we need to put in here, but it's just going to be displaying that comment, whatever's in that comments array for the post. So a bit of padding, a bit of margin top and bottom for the element we're returning. and then we'll put another div in here. Class name is equal to flex, gap2, and items center. Again, lining up everything nicely for us. And we're going to go with the same sort of thing again. We'll have the image, which the source of that will be the comment, and then we've got the user property on there, and then we've got avatar URL. So that's all good. Just close that there. And then we just want to add some classes into it. So width of 6. So this time we'll make it a little bit smaller than the image on the top of the post to identify the user, but we will put the user's name in as well. So just inside a strong tag here, we'll put a class name of text small, just to make the text a bit smaller, because the comments don't want to stand out as much as the rest of the post. And then comment.user.login. So it'll just give a reference to who actually made that comment. And of course, we want to actually display the text for it as well. So finally, we'll just put a p tag at the bottom and just put on that a bit of padding top and bottom. Make sure the text is small again. And then we're just going comment.text. Okay, so let's save that. We've got the comment component created. So we can add that into the posts here. So when we've got to the bottom of our actual post, just before we finish off everything inside of there, we'll say post.comments, and this could be null, there could be nothing there, so we use the safe navigation. We'll save post comments length, just to give us a bit of a conditional to this, because we don't want to show anything if the comments aren't there at all, just to keep everything blank. But if we do have something in the array, we'll create another div. It's got a class name of p4, some padding, and we'll set the background just be a light grey colour, so ever so slightly with BG grey 50. And what we're going to do inside of there is put in a heading for the comments section. So we'll say font bold and comments section. That's where we're going to display all the comments. So for the post again, comments, we know we've got something inside there because we've reached this point of the code. So for each of the comments, we're going to map those. So for each comment, we will open this up. And we're just going to return a comment component. I'll just make sure we import that. And the key can be the comment.id. I think we might have missed that out of the interface. Can we just go ahead and change that? Let's find it from here. So for iComment, so there is an ID on each of the comments. Just check it's actually in the data as well. Otherwise, we're going to get some problems when we try and use that. So here's the example data. So yeah, each comment does have its own ID as well, so that's good. So just missed that out from the interface. So we can use, for the key, we can use comment ID. Just make sure we close this up. And also we need to pass in some props as well to that, and that is the comment prop is just going to be that whole comment. That's for each individual one that's in the array. Okay, so I've got a bit of a problem here. It doesn't look like it's actually imported the comment at all here, so it's from here. There we go. It must have imported the wrong thing there. Okay, so if we don't have any comments, obviously we don't want to display anything, so let's just make sure we're closing this up properly. So there we go. And then down here, if there's no comments, we'll just display nothing. And so now if we go back to the app, we should see that that single comment that we've added is displaying down there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We've got the post, got the content, and we've got some comments down there below as well. So probably what we'll move on to next is just the ability for the user to add their own comments, because obviously at the moment we can only do it through Postman. So let's create some forms on the comment component to do that. Makes sense whilst we're here. Sorry, it'll be in the post component just below where we've rendered the comments out themselves. And what we can do is put a bit of conditional logic in here to say the user's got to be logged in, which we can check with the auth service. They've got to be logged in to actually render this. So we're going to render that. If not, we'll render nothing, because obviously we don't want someone who's not logged in to actually try and post a comment, because that will obviously fail on the API. So within this fragment, what we're going to do is put some more markup to actually show the comments. And we're going to put in a div with a class name of padding level 4, BG gray, and we'll use 100 this time. It's flex, items are centered, and gap 2, just to line things up nicely. And once we've done that, we're going to put in basically an input box with the user's image next to it, so it looks like they're commenting as themselves. Different ways to do this, obviously, but this will work for our examples today. So we're going to post from the post, we're going to get the avatar URL and the class name for this. Again, we're going to use a small representation of that by setting the width to be 6 and then rounded to be full. Should we close that? And then once we've got the image, we're just going to put in an input right next to it there. And this will be what the user fills in. Let's just style that first of all. So in terms of classes, we want some padding, a border, and we'll just set width to be full. And the other things that we need on here is to actually set up the value and actual changing of that value bindings. First of all, let's just put a placeholder in here. So add a comment maybe. Okay, so this is something in React that you need to do with your state. So we need to set up some state to manage that text. So let's do that up here. Oops. So we'll say const, and we'll say new comment text, and set new comment text is equal to use state, and it's just going to be a string here for the input value. So down here, what we'll do is we'll say for the input itself, the value of it is going to be the new comment text. And when this changes, what we're going to do is update the state. So we can do that with a simple function inlined here. So with the event that comes from that, we're going to set the new comment text equal to event.target.value. And that will just set up the binding for the other two things there. Of course, we need a button in here as well. So when the user clicks it, it actually creates the new comment and sends the backend request for us. So we will set a button here, and we'll just set the onClick event to be equal to add new comment, which is a function we haven't created yet. But whilst we're here, we'll just do the classes for that. Class name is equal to, I'll just use a blue button here, so background blue 700 and text white, and of course a bit of padding as well. So this add new comment function, we'll create it up here, and this has the job of actually sending the network request off to create the new comment, but we also want to make sure that we notify the parent component as well, because obviously we need to refresh all those comments and rebuild all of the posts with any changes. So that's why we've passed in this prop over here, and you'll see in a moment how we use that. So what we'll first do is just check if there's actually any content in new comment text. So if it's an empty string, we'll just return so we don't do anything. But otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to await the post service, which we'll just import. I need to make sure this is an async function as well. So we're going to await the post service dot create comment, and what we're going to do is pass in the payload. So if you remember from this function, we need to actually pass in the payload and the post ID. And so we'll do that. First of all, we'll pass in text is equal to the state that's held in new comment text. And then the second argument that's passed in, we've got access to the post via the props that's been passed in, and we'll just grab the ID off that, and that should create a new comment based on the function that we've already created in the post service. So if that all goes ahead okay, we can notify the parent component by calling their post changed function that's been passed in as a prop, and that will trigger a refresh of the API by pulling in some new data. And that should be pretty much all we need to do. So unless the layout's gone really badly here, no, okay, we're missing some text inside the button there. That would be helpful. So let's go back to our button, which is down here, and we will say add for add comment. Simple enough. And now we've got the ability to add a comment in here. So let's just test it again from the actual web app this time rather than Postman. This is another comment. Nice and simple. There you go. You can see we're actually adding that comment, and it's being rebuilt at the top level of the home page by re-triggering a refresh of pulling in the data from the API again. Probably one thing we want to do is just clear this text as well. So we can do that up here in that add new comment function just by saying set new comment text to be empty. Okay, so we've got the ability to add comments to posts. The other thing that we need to do is to actually add posts into the database itself. And we're going to do that in the create post component that we already had set up from the beginning of the tutorial. But obviously we need to create a form and actually submit that data via the post service that we've got set up. Okay, so let's have a crack at this new post function, this component. So we're going to need some state inside of the form that we're going to be creating, and luckily there's only two things that we need to put in the form itself, which is the title and the content. If we were creating a bigger form, then this would be a bit more of a challenge to do it this way, but because we've only got a couple of things in the form, this is going to be pretty straightforward. So we've got title and we want content as well. So two bits of state that we're going to manage for this. And there's one other bit of state that I'm just going to add in for the moment as well, and that is just a boolean of show success. And we're going to use this to just display a success message on the form itself, or the top of the form, once we've actually successfully submitted a form. So we'll just set this to false to start off with. Okay, so that's the state that we need. And we're just going to put a heading in the top of the page as we have done with the other two pages that we've worked on so far. So what we're going to do is going to return a div, and inside there's going to be a few bits of content. So let's start off with the columns itself. So it's exactly the same as it has been in the other components as well. Probably could have made a component out of this actually, because it would have saved us some time. So, but here we are, nearly done with this section now anyway. So there we go, we've got the top, and then we just put in a title as well. So it's got a class name of margin top and bottom 4, text is 3XL, and also we've got font black and uppercase. Okie doke. So title for this page is going to be create a new post. And with the heading done, we can work on the actual form itself. So we're going to have a form tag in here. Okay. And class name of margin top and bottom, and padding all around a 4. And we'll use that shadow large as well to make it stand out like a card on the page. And inside there, we're going to have our form groups. Let's just tidy this up. And for each of those form groups, we're going to have a label and an input. So for the title, and we'll have an input here. Obviously, it's going to be type of text for the title. And we're going to set up our bindings for our state. So we've got title is the value. On change, same sort of thing that we did before. With the event, we'll set the title state just in line here. So e.target.state, and close that up. And the other things that we need in here as well, just some classes. So class name, give it a border, some padding, and set the width to be full. And then the type is text, and we'll just finish up by giving it the ID of title so that the label matches up with it as well. And target value, that's the error there. And so that kind of looks a little bit like that. And then for the content, it's going to be slightly different. We'll have another div here, and we'll still have a label. This will be for content. but this time we're going to use the text area because obviously the content might be larger than just a few lines of string. So, but we do the same sort of thing. We set the value to be equal to content. Unchanged is equal to the same event. So here we go. Event, set content, e.target.value. And we just want some classes on there too as well. So border, padding level 2, width full, and just make sure the ID is set as content as well. Okay, so we've got our text area set up there. I don't think I closed it off actually. Let's just check. Yep, there we go. So there's the text area content as well. And then finally we need a button at the bottom of the form as well. So we'll say button, and then on click. I guess we should use the on submit of the form as well, but this will do for the moment. On click event, and we'll just call a function called create post, and I'm passing in the event object to this create post function because I want to actually stop the default browser behavior from actually trying to submit the form and reload the page, which will obviously clear everything. So that's why I'm just passing in the event to that function there, which we'll create in just a second. Let's just finish up the classes for the button. So padding level 2, background blue 700. 600 probably be fine, but I think I used 700 elsewhere as well just to keep it consistent. And then we'll say text is white, and then finally some text for the button. Let's see if I remember it this time. Is create post. Okay, so the only thing we need to do is create this function up here, and let's just do that with a function up here. So create post, so it'll be an async function, and we're going to get the form event that we've been passed in. So prevent. Oh, is it not imported? Let's just make sure that's imported. There we go. Prevent default. So just to stop the browser navigation as mentioned before. And then there's a similar thing that we did with the create comment function in the previous component. With the post service, we're just going to say create post. And if you remember from that service, that function that we created, all we really need to pass in is a payload of content and title, and the service will do everything else for us. So where are we going to get the title and content from? Well, we've got it just here in our state. So title, content, and that will pass the payload to that function. Okay, so once that's done, we want to set the show success to be true, and then we also want to set the title to be empty, and set the content to be empty as well, and that will just reset the form when we create a new post. Okay, so let's save that and let's test it out in the browser. So here we go over with our app. So let's just make sure it's reloaded. And if we go into the create post section now, it's looking a little bit big there, that form. It should be giving us a column at that sort of resolution. Maybe I just messed up the classes on here. So when we're on width full, looks like the div that's got that column classes on for us is not capturing the form itself. So let's just move that down here. Make sure we're all lined up. And if we go back now, we should have a nicely centered post form to create posts directly in the page. So we should try and test this out now and see if it works. So a post made from the app, some content. And then if we click create post, we should find that it resets the form. And we should also now see if we have a look in the API data that we've got a post in here that's made from the app, and we've made some put some content in there, so that's all working okay. The only thing we haven't done yet is on the actual app, when that has submitted, we want to display a success message just to let the user know that that went through okay, because otherwise it's a bit confusing whether or not it's saved or not. So just up here inside, just before we actually render the form itself, we'll say, is the show success state in our app, is that truthy or not? And if it is, that's great. We can show them a user a success message, and that'll just be a div with a class name of bg green 700, text white, padding 2, and just put something inside there saying like the post was created successfully. Okay, just close that div up there. So now when we submit a post, we should see that success message. So I guess let's just give that, oh, there we go. The state's updated for us now. So this is what we should expect to see when we create a new post within the app. So at this point now, we've really got a working app. We can log into it. We can create new posts. And assuming you're actually logged in as well, you can comment on the other posts as well. So this is the new post that's been made from the app. And we should be able to still submit comments on it as well. Obviously, it's just got my avatar on there, but if there are other users logging in, it would show theirs as well, so it'd look a bit different. But we can create posts and create comments. But now we really get into the idea of this tutorial, which is to validate the data that's been sent to the back-end system, whether it's from the front end or via Postman, and seeing how it could be manipulated to actually change the data that goes into the API and then gets rendered out to the user. So let's first of all start by looking at what the problem is that we've got with our app at the moment. Obviously, it's a bit lazily coded just to illustrate the example problems that we might get, but hopefully I can show you now what sort of thing might go wrong when you leave the app in this sort of state. So let's go over to Postman to start off with, and I'm going to create a new post. Now, if I was someone who was investigating the security of this particular app, I might have noticed that comments are actually stored directly on the post rather than their own separate entity, and that's something that could cause us a problem in this sort of way. So we could create a new post directly from Postman, say a hacked post, for example, and then after that we're going to put some content. It doesn't matter what it is, hacked, for example. But then because this data just gets blindly pushed into the database without really any checking, I could also put some comments in here as well. So for example, I could put an array of comments that match the format of how the comments are appearing in the database once they're saved. So for example, if I just grab one of these here, so this is one of the comments up here. So this first comment, the whole object from this. And then we can paste that into here. Just make sure we get rid of some of the curly braces there. So this is the comment, and I can just add this in manually myself. So I could use my own ID and login and avatar URL. Maybe just change the IDs or something like that, just so that everything's separate. And I could say this is a hacked comment, because I didn't actually make this comment through the app. It was posted at this point through the actual mechanisms that we've got to creating a post in the first place. So if I just save that, you see we get a good response back from the API. And if we go back to the app just to display that, rather than looking at the API data itself, you can see we've got here a hacked post, hacked, and this is a hacked comment. So I didn't actually make that comment through the app. So I'm kind of getting around the front end app itself just by inserting stuff dynamically into the database. And of course, you could put your own comments in from other users in this way as well. So for example, if we went over to the GitHub app and just search for a particular well-known user. So let's find Brad Travers's account and find his user details here. So obviously his user account here, if you don't know, Brad is a well-known developer who makes tutorials. So if we get his account and go back to the GitHub documentation, you can see we can quite easily find out some user details from GitHub just by running a curl against the username, so just a network request. So if we go over to the terminal and just get out of our Mongo connection here and just run that curl against Brad's username. So here we go. What you'll find is all of his GitHub information. I should say it's publicly available as well, so there's nothing in here that shouldn't be displayed. But we can see the ID, the avatar URL, and the login, for example. So we can actually create a hacked post in this way with comments from other users as well. So if we just copy each of these bits of information, so ID, login, and the actual avatar URL is the same. It's just replacing that number with the ID. So let's just say I get a comment from Brad saying great post, for example. We'll save that. And what we should find in the app now, when we see that new post that's been created, we can see that we've got a comment from another user on GitHub who obviously didn't make that comment, and we've just inserted that into our own app just by manipulating the data that's been sent in via the API requests. And of course this could be done in the front end as well, but it's just easier to demonstrate it in Postman. So what we need to do really is validate the schema, the data that's coming into the API, and make sure that it's not got extra information in there, and also that it's the right length and quantity of what we need. So we're going to do that using a package called Joy, and there are lots of different schemas available. But Joy has been around for a while, and it just enables you to do certain things with the data that's coming in. For example, to say that it should be text, or it should be a number, and it should be within a certain range as well. And what it will also do is it will disallow any other information that the user might be trying to send to the app to do things like hacking in the comments that we've just done. So let's install Joy into the actual API itself. Let's close everything down just to keep things tidy. And back in the API folder, we're going to go into the routes, and it's in particular the post route that's going to be most affected by this, or the post routes. So we'll install Joy to start off with. And once that's installed, we can import it with a standard import as Joy from Joy. And what you need to do with Joy is to create a schema. So you would have seen on the web page a moment ago that you create this schema object, and then you can use that schema to validate data that's coming in, such as the data that's coming in via our post requests. So let's create those schemas up here, and then we can use them throughout the rest of this route. So we're going to create a new post schema, because that's the one that's mostly affected by this problem that we've just demonstrated. And we're going to say the data that's coming in is an object, and then we can describe that object and what properties it should have. So it's going to have a title, and then we use Joy's inbuilt functions to describe what this data should look like. So first of all, we'll say it's a string, and then we can do things like saying it should have a minimum length of 2, for example, and then it should also have a maximum length of 100. So we can say that the title string must be within this range, and also we can say that it's required as well, so that if the user forgets to send that somehow, then we can actually validate the data that's coming in from the form on the app, or disallow anything that's being used from Postman, for example. So the other thing that we've got within a post is content. Okay, so we'll say joy.string again, and this time we'll say it's got to be a minimum of 2 again, so it's got to have something in at least, and the max we'll say is something like 1000 characters, and then we'll say it's required as well. And that is our schema set up and ready to use to validate the data in our endpoints. Okay, so we're going to add that, so this only really applies to the post creation of a new post here. So we're going to validate the data before we even touch the database here. So we're going to do that with Joy's functions just before we try and actually put any data and save anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a try catch block. Okay, and in what we're going to try, we're going to await the new post schema, and we're going to call a function on that called validate async. And then what we're going to be validating is the data that the user's passing in, which is stored in body. Okay, so that's all we need to do. That will actually validate the data coming in and just make sure that there aren't any problems with it. And if there are, then we'll hit this catch block. So what we could do is we could return some data. So we could say a res status of 400. So we've had a bad request, and JSON, we'll just put a status of error. Okay, and then we'll have a message, and the message, you probably we'll just log out the error for the moment in here, sorry, that we've caught from the catch block here, because I just want to show you what that data actually looks like before we actually do something with it. So now if we just go back to Postman, so this post that we've just created should no longer work. So we're trying to create a new post. So we're getting a 400 bad request, and the response that we're getting back is this information that comes from Joy. And it's a little bit convoluted, there's lots of information in there. So we've got the original data that was passed in, but what's really interesting, or what's useful down here, is that we've got this details property, which is an array of all the errors. And the main error we've got here is that comments is not allowed, which is brilliant because we've stopped the problem that we had before. But we probably want to send this message back to the front end app. So what we're going to do inside of our code is, instead of just returning the error, we're going to return error details.map. And for each of the errors that we get, we'll extract or destructure the message, and then we'll just return that message. So we're just plucking it from the property, from the object, and then we'll just join that together with a comma. So that will be sent back to the front end, and it will look a little bit like this. So if we go to the front end app again, let's actually go to the code, sorry for it, and we're going to add in here, in the component that creates a new post, we're going to add in an error component into here. So that will look a little bit like this. We'll just first of all create a bit of state. So instead of show success, what we're going to have in here is a bit of state that holds the error message, which will basically, we'll just call it error message, and that will be a string. Just set it as an empty string to start off with. And what we'll do, if there is an error, just either before or after the show success, we'll only get one or the other here. We'll say error message. If that's present, we're going to display this content. If not, nothing. If there's something in there, and we'll have inside there just a div with a class name of bgred700, or we'll say 500. Text white and padding level 2. Just close this div up here. And what we'll actually show to the user here is the actual error message itself. So we can just output that bit of state into here. Okay, so we just need to capture that error message in our request to creating a post, because at the moment we don't actually try and catch any of the failures of the actual service itself. So let's try and do this. And if it's okay, then we'll do what we've been doing and setting the success. But if there is an error that comes back from that, we just want to catch it, and then we want to set the error message, which is basically the state that we just created, based on, and this is a bit complicated for the response from Axios, but we've got error.response.data.message. I'll just type that as any from inside of here. So we've got this error that's returned from Axios, which is what we just saw in Postman a moment ago, and we'll just display that message to the user. So just by normally creating a post in the app, we shouldn't see the comments aren't allowed error message appearing, but if the title or the content are missing, we should see this message saying that title's not allowed to be empty. Fill something out there. Content's not allowed to be empty, but if we put something in there, content length must be at least 2 characters long. So that validation, that schema that we've just set up for the new post is obviously working on the back end, and we're getting a problem coming back from the API in the form of an error message, which is then propagating into the app. So that's the idea really about schema and Joy, and how to actually validate the content that the user's passing in. And you can see it there, the schema that we've created is being followed, and we're sending the error messages back to the front end so that they can be displayed to the user. So let's do something similar for the comments as well, because we can make sure that we're setting a comment of a particular length, for example. So back in the API, we've got this comment route here that we want to update. First of all, let's just create the schema for that. So we'll say there is a comment schema. And this can be as complicated or as simple as you like. We're only really accepting one property of text, but we want to make sure that we're excluding anything else and that text is of the correct length. So we'll say Joy string, and then it's min length of, we'll say 2 again, and then the max length is going to be 50. So we'll save that, and then down in the endpoint that we've got here, just again, before we actually touch the database, we want to validate that schema. So we'll have a try catch block. And we're going to try the validation for the comment schema. So we again validate async and just pass in that whole body object that's been passed by the user. And if that's good, then we can carry on. But if we do find any errors, we'll do the same thing as before. We'll say res.status of 400. And the JSON we're going to send back is a status property of error. And then the message is the same thing again. So error.details.map. Extract the message from each of those detail instances in the array, and then just join them together if there's more than one. Okay, so we should have the same thing, but we need to go into the app to actually display that. So let's go ahead and let's get rid of this error first of all. So we'll close that down now. The API is up to date. But what we're going to do in the post component is to capture the error if it occurs. So we'll say, is there a new comment error? It's just a bit of state here for us. Set new comment error. And that is equivalent to use state string. And we'll just set that as an empty string to start off with. So what we'll do here, again, we're not actually trying to catch any problems that occur with this post service at the moment. So let's make sure that's all wrapped up in a try catch block. So here, if everything's okay, we'll just carry on as normal. But if there is a problem, we'll set the new comment error to be equal to error.response.data.message. And TypeScript doesn't like that, so we'll just set that as any there. So now if we do have a comment error, we're going to display that somewhere, but where do we display it? It's probably going to be best just before, just at the top of the comments section maybe. So here where we've got is the user logged in, is where the user can display new comments. So what we'll do is we'll say, if we've got something in new comment error, then we're going to display some markup, and the markup will be just something similar to what we had on the new post page. So padding level 4, BG red 700, text white are the classes. And then we'll just say the new comment error is what we want to display for the user. So this will just display one of those little banners if there is a problem adding a comment. So let's try that out. Let's go back to the app. Okay, so let's go back to the home. So here we go in this first post that we created. So if we create something that's valid, hopefully that should still go through. We created a new comment. If we try and create something with one character, we get this error saying that the text must be at least 2 characters long. And if I put in a really long string into there that's over the 50 characters limit that we set in the schema, we should find that that is not allowed either. So we go, we've added validation to comments as well, and that's all being done on the back end. The Express app is using Joy to generate a schema, and then it's comparing the body that the front end app is passing in to check whether or not it meets that criteria. So of course, creating validation like this is great because we want to catch anything on the back end to make sure that the user isn't trying to get around the security measures in our app or any validation that we've got set up. But you should also check out this next video where we're going to look at how to validate a form on the front end, which saves any network requests going to the back end. So the validation is done on the client side and you get more of an immediate feedback and it's a bit more flexible in what you can show. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you learned something. Thanks very much for watching.